Well, good morning, or is it afternoon, ladies and gentlemen? I hope you've had time to enjoy a lobster roll and suss out, I'm a zoologist, whether it's a genuine lobster. I'll be running upstairs afterwards, and for those you haven't had it, there's still plenty of time. Okay, so my talk today, how smart are animals, or that's an American word we get used to. We would say how intelligent are animals, but I understand what this is. So, and I wonder how smart your pets are. I'm sure you all believe that your dog understands every word that you say. Well, let's find out. So we're going to trot through this kind of thing, whether animals are smart enough to learn, perhaps, and solve problems. And at the end, we'll trickle on to whether they have any kind of a language. Well, we'll see. So first of all, what's learning all about? I mean, we think we know, don't we? We learn throughout our lifelong learning. We pick up things. But technically, it's regarded as a change in our behavior as a result of some experience we've had, whether it's in the classroom or the home or wherever. So you develop a new behavior that you have learned, in fact. You change your behavior as a result of experience. And one thing that people always want to know is the size of your brain important, or the size of any animal's brain? Who's got the biggest brains? And maybe because they're the smartest, who knows? Well, it turns out that things like elephants and whales have the biggest brains, even bigger than ours. But that's not the whole story, really. Just because you're larger, you need a kind of more hardware to drive a larger machine. An elephant needs more brain than a mouse, for example. You know, it's kind of obvious. So the thing is what we call relative brain size, and that's the proportion, really, in relation to your body size. So the proportion of your brain in relation to your body size is the important thing. Relative brain size. And look at this, we're so proud of this, aren't we? This great evolutionary miracle that has all these millions of brain cells and connections, a kind of a supercomputer that so far has proved to be much better than the electronic models that we find in the computer world. But, things are advancing. I'll give a whole lecture about that. But I'm not today. Just let's stick to the animals, friends. So how does this learning take place? One of the things is what we call trial and error. That is to say, you just play around and try things out. You know, like the key to your room, how does it go in that way or that way? All that kind of thing. And you learn like that. Here's a shot of two cute kittens, which are play fighting, as we call it. They're not really fighting, right? They're just being cute and playing. They haven't got claws, but they're learning how to maneuver, how to outbox their sibling in this case, perhaps. This will be important in later life when they really get to fight. They'll know what to do, how to make all the moves, and so on and so forth. And here's these kids doing the same thing, learning how to stack bricks and so on, maybe for the first time without them falling down. Okay? So that's what we call trial and error. Have a go. And if you don't succeed, try again, then you'll pick it up. Another way we learn is by imitation, by looking at something and saying, oh, that's how it's done. Maybe I'll try that. Yeah, imitation. Now, watching your adults is the best form of imitation, sometimes in the animal kingdom in particular. These are lions going on a hunt with their mum at the top here, these little cubs, and for months and maybe years they'll be following her, watching her, how she stalks her prey, how she rushes, how she kills it, and so on. They'll learn that. And that's a typical kind of thing. And no coincidence I've picked a lion, because you may, if you're old enough like me, remember that old movie, Born Free, about Elsa the lioness, who was brought up by a couple of crazy English people in East Africa as a cub, and they kept her till she was huge, and they thought, oh, let's get rid of it, as you often do. And anyway, how nice to release her to the wild, they thought. Nice thought. And what happened when they released her to the wild? She hadn't a clue how to survive. Certainly couldn't hunt, stalk and run down and grab a gazelle. No idea at all. So after she got very thin, they went back and rescued her and spent months then dragging a zebra carcass or anything behind their Land Rover and encouraging her to do it. You've probably seen the movie, you know. But it's a good lesson for conservationists who are keen on releasing things back to the wild. When they've missed these crucial stages, they have to learn. They have to learn. These things don't come by instinct all the time. Anyway, here's a kind of learning, a more technical kind of learning. This guy, Ivan Pavlov, a very famous Nobel Prize winner in Russia, a long time ago, discovered what's sometimes called the basic law of learning that we now call conditioning, which is a word you've probably heard, little psychology here. What did he discover? How did he do this? Pavlov worked actually with domestic dogs, and he had them in a laboratory, in little cages in a laboratory, and he studied them very scientifically with his white coat and his assistants and all the apparatus of science as it was then. And he made a real breakthrough. So I'll take you through the sort of thing he did. So a little cartoon on the right there shows that there's a dog in his laboratory, and he would ring a bell by the dog. Great. So what did the dog do? Look at him and think, you know, who's this crazy old guy ringing a bell? And so on and so forth. Nothing would happen. Now that's silly, but it's important to establish that. Of course, the bell has become important later, but it is not now. It's going to learn about the bell. So then he went through a stage of coming into the lab, or his assistants did, with a sort of Tom and Jerry chunk of meat like this, or some food, and he would give at feeding time once a day, he would give the dog the food and ring the bell at the same time, or his assistants would. And the dog would salivate and eat and so on. Obviously, he was very pleased by this. And days would go by. So maybe after a week or 10 days or 2 weeks or whatever, he would come in again and he would repeat the first experiment. No food for the dog. He would just come and ring the bell. And the dog went wild. It salivated. He actually measured the saliva, being a sort of pernickety scientist. That was one of his measures. And he said, that's a new behavior. Dogs don't respond to bells. I've shown you that. Now they do. I've trained the dog. I've conditioned it to the bell. That's a simple kind of little bit of psychology for you. So he became very famous for learning this because it's the basis of most learning, it turns out. Doing this kind of thing. Conditioning, that's what it's called. And after Pavlov, it's called classical conditioning. There are other kinds of conditioning we now know, but it's the same basic thing. It's how you train an animal and teach it to do something. And what you do is simply, in most cases, exactly do what Pavlov did. You want your little cute dog to sit up and beg and impress your friends, right? You give it a piece of food when it does it. And eventually the dog knows it's going to sit up to get the food. You may have a signal to make it do that, and so on and so forth. And that is the basis, believe it or not, that simple thing of all learning with animals, training animals. You can get them then to do really silly things. If you have a lot of patience and skill, because it's not easy, as I said, you can get dogs to do stupid things like this, if you wish. The dogs are now conditioned, and you have a signal that tells them to do it, and when they've done it, you reward them or reinforce them, usually with food. So it's reward and punishment, as they say in the old book, right? And you can speed up the learning not only by rewarding it, but also punishing an animal if it doesn't do what you want. This is the nasty side, if you like, of animal training. I don't think it's very common, but I'm sure it probably occurs. So it's what we call the carrot and the stick, isn't it? You get the carrot if you do well, and you get a whack if you don't. Like old school days, right? Letters, come along, boy. You know. Not now. The carrot and the stick. And animals can be taught to do loads of things, actually, by following that routine. Now, it takes a lot of patience and a lot of time and a lot of skill. Although it's a simple thing, you try teaching a dolphin to go up backwards on its flipper and kind of beg like a dog. There's a whole bunch of them here at SeaWorld or somewhere like that. Yeah. How do you do that? How do you get it? Because it's not going to do that, is it? Initially, like the bell kind of thing. So what you do is what the trainer would do at SeaWorld or somewhere like this. It would have one dolphin. It's been caught or whatever. It's never done anything like this before on its own. He's got time in the pool when the people are not there in the morning or at night to train his dolphin. That's his job. Say, right, Jim, that's your dolphin. We want it, to be able to join the group and do this. Off you go. And what he would do quite simply is he would make sure that the dolphin in the early morning hasn't had its breakfast or any food. This is always the thing they do. Mildly cruel, but not. It's got to now work for its food and find out how to get its food. So the dolphin comes swimming around first time in the outdoor pool. Wow, this is a great place. And it sees the trainer in a red or yellow boiler suit, waving and, making nice noises, but not feeding it. So it comes around and it's hoping, because it has been fed previously, otherwise it would have starved, obviously, but not today. And nothing might happen interesting enough for the trainer, so tomorrow he'll turn up and the dolphin comes out again. By this time, it may be very hungry, but by this time, it's also wondering perhaps what to do. And what the trainer's waiting for is for the dolphin to come around by him and poke its head up out of the water and look at him. And as soon as it pokes its head out of the water, wham, in goes a fish, straight away. Dolphin goes away again, comes around. Maybe, but that's always the case, it will do it again and in goes the fish. And in the next days, if this is successful, and by the way, it's not often successful, many animals don't learn and are kind of rejected from the show at this stage, that just don't seem to have this. It'll come around and it pokes its head out. He doesn't give it any fish. And what he does is he's waiting for it to come out more. And it's hungry. He's thinking, well, I know it's that kind of thing. Out it comes. And if it comes out more, in goes a fish. And gradually, it builds up what he wants it to do, coming right out, using its flipper to stand and maybe going backwards and so on. Gradually, it might take months. So it ain't easy, but it's using the same basic laws that Pavlov discovered. And if you look at a dolphinarium, you've been to SeaWorld or any of these places and seen the dolphins or killer whales trained like this, you will notice, and you'll now notice, because you'll think about it perhaps, there's always buckets of fish around. Because these animals are worked hungry, deliberately, for the morning show and maybe the afternoon show. Out they come, and they want their breakfast, and they've been trained how to get it. And they do their little things, and wham, in goes the fish when they've done it successfully, whatever it was. And just look at all those photographs. Big fish there for the killer whale, buckets of fish for these trainers down here. You'll notice this. Now, that's not the only way using food. There are other ways, of course, more sort of civilized ways. Socially rewarding an animal. A social reward, what's that? Well, the dog, your pet dog, right? You're its master. It's your dog. Your dog loves you, wants to please you and do things for you, right? All the time. And so there's nothing more the dog likes than being petted. Good boy, Rover. Oh, yes, it's my dog. There. So if it does what you want, you can do that. If it doesn't do what you want, you have to be a little, not cruel, but off with the dog. Don't show it any affection. Wait till it does it. And so petting the dog works in a way without food. That's a nice way to do it. Now, it's just the same, really, with teaching kids at school, basically. If you can, as this little girl here with a teacher on a one-to-one maths project, perhaps, right? And there she is. And the little girl's struggling around, and she's adding up the stuff, and she gets the right answer. And when she gets the right answer, not the wrong one, the teacher says, "Good girl, Rosie." "Oh, great, I'll tell your mum when she comes and picks you up." Good girl. And the little girl loves the teacher, wants to please the teacher, wants to be teacher's pet, and she'll learn fast under this kind of clever teaching. Only teachers help. So it's another social rewarding system. It works very, very well. People be nice to you. You want to please them, so you will. Now, where does this stuff occur? The change in behavior that's learning that we're talking about. Where does it happen? Well, yes, I showed you pictures of the brain. It occurs there. Where? Well, it occurs in one particular bit of brain. This is a section through the brain that you see here. You look a slice, you're looking sideways through a half of a brain, and that red bit there is a thing called the hippocampus. It's in the base of the brain. It's quite a primitive area, actually. It was important early in the evolution of the brain. Obviously, learning in this case, there it is. And that's where what we call short-term learning, initial learning occurs, we know, in the hippocampus. Why is it called the hippocampus? Well, if you look at the bottom slide there, you'll see a student has dissected a human hippocampus out. It's a funny kind of shape out of a brain as part of a project. And next to it, there's a seahorse. And the name of the seahorse, as you probably know, hippocampus. That's where it got its name. Anatomists are funny like this. They name things like that. So that's why it's called the hippocampus. And we know that's where short-term learning takes place. It's the first stage of learning. And we've found with human beings, in particular, it is important. And now we have brain scans so we can figure out how big and important the area is. And they found in a study that the famous London cab drivers, taxi drivers, that you see proudly coming down the mall here in Parade, when they put them in brain scanners in the University of London medical facilities, they found, sure enough, that taxi drivers have a very well-developed, not abnormally large, but larger than average hippocampus. Because why? Well, because they have to learn their way around. And spatial memory is one of the things that the hippocampus is good at. That's what it is there for. It's one of the things it does very well. Now, therefore, why these taxi drivers? The London cab driver, unlike cab drivers in some other capitals, who have their Uber stuck on the thing and take you to where you want to go, to get the license to drive the famous London black cab, you have to walk the streets of central London, walk them with a map for years, learning every right turn, every wrong turn, every one-way system, where the hotels are. And that's the only way to do it. It's no use zooming around in the traffic. So they tend to walk around at night. Sometimes they're on a scooter or something with a friend, and they've got a map, and they go, yeah, we're doing NW1, the Sierra, and they do this. And until they've done that and can find their way around effortlessly without a sat-nav, they have an examination after 2 or 3 years, and they have to pass it, and it's very strict. And the examiner will sit opposite them. They're not in a cab, he's just sit opposite them. He's got a map of it's only central London. And he'll say, okay, we're at Buckingham Palace. Take me to the Piccadilly Hotel by the quickest and best route. And the driver has to tell him where it goes. Okay, so I go away from the main monument at the front of the palace. Now, I can't go down the mall because that's one way. I have to go down Goodwin Street, and so on. And the guy's fine on the map. And if he gets it right, after a number of these tests, he'll get the special license, which is worth a lot of money. So these guys are very good. And I can say that because I use them quite a bit too. And for American tourists, if you want to get somebody, take a real cab. It may cost you a bit if you're on your own. With 2, you're just about break even. With 4, it's a real bargain because they can seat 4. Have the seats at the back. You're going to the theatre, right? Take me to the Royal Theatre, and you'll get there fairly quick. And they generally don't mess you about, and not the friendliest people in the world always, but they are reliable and they're very proud. And they say, do you want to eat afterwards? Where's it? And I said, yes, there's a restaurant across the street. I can show you that as I go by. They're very, very good. Enough plugs. I didn't get paid to do. Just patriotic. Right. Birds, though, are very remarkable, actually, probably more remarkable than our London cab driver. Lots of birds like jays and chickadees and other things store things for the winter. All right, so when the seed eaters drop off and lay on the ground, they go and pick these things up because they're easily fed and they've got plenty of time in autumn to do this, and they stash it all around. They stash it in little bits of vegetation in the top where it's broken off and keep it in there. They don't bury it, they stash it around. And by some complicated experiments that I haven't got time to tell you how, but they used radioactive seeds so the scientists could find exactly where these things were and monitor whether they were taken, compared to a decoy seed half a metre away. And this sort of thing, they found that, amazingly, these tiny birds with quite a tiny brain, but a large hippocampus in relative size, could remember the location of thousands of seeds. And they gradually depleted them when the weather was back. They didn't go to the ones next door. It wasn't a random thing. They knew where they were. You may not believe that, but it has been proved by some very serious, good experiments. And they have a large hippocampus. Right, what else do we need? Yeah, and human long-term memories, not the short-term ones that I was talking about, or necessarily the spatial ones, other things, your precious memories of who people are, where you've been on cruises, you can bore your friends that, yes, we went to, reel off all that. It's all stored up there somewhere. Where is that? Where are memories stored? And the answer is they're stored in the side of the brain. The blue side that you see there, again, we're looking sideways at the human brain. The blue side is, a thing called the temporal lobe. It means the side lobe. That is like a computer memory store. It's just like having a memory stick. And all the stuff gets fed in there, either side. Yeah, and the brain scan on the right, where you see the sort of yellow-orange areas lighting up, is when the subject is in a scanner and is just being asked to recall various memories or events or questions. And to do that, they need to raid this store and tap into it, and the brain lights up, showing that's what they're doing. They're using the temporal lobes to answer questions from their memories. Now, it doesn't mean, actually, that because humans have wonderful memories, and a lot of people do too, all those smart quiz people who know the longest river and all this sort of stuff, seem very smart, but actually, it's not that smart. If you have a large memory store, it's a wonderful thing. Okay, well, good for you, but it's not really the ultimate thing. Make you unpopular with your quiz friends. What the definition of sort of smartness is, being intelligent, is working things out, not just memorizing and stashing things in and then recalling it. It's problem solving, and it's using stuff in the memory store that you've learned to solve a new problem that you haven't come across before and you haven't learned, figuring it out. An intelligence test, that is. Problem solving, that's the real thing. And we measure problem solving and intelligence as IQ, intelligence quotient. Here's a girl doing a test there where she set a number of problems, she's pressing the buttons and so on, and she's solving all things that she's learned previously to solve a new thing that the tester has set, the question has set. So there it is. Problem solving is the real intelligence, not just memory. Now, where do you get this? Well, you only get problem solving really in us and our fellow mammals groups, everything from a dolphin to an elephant or whatever you find it, and you get it in birds too, very well. That's sort of the evolutionary pinnacle, really, of the animal kingdom. So you go to reptiles, fish, amphibians. No, they don't do this. So it's interesting. And here's a chimp just showing off that by using a touch screen that he can do memory tests that some psychologist has set him. And they're very good at this, very fast, very good. Now, you've got to be careful when you look at this, because some of these animal abilities that are claimed may not be really true. And here's a famous case from the past. This is a horse called Clever Hans, or Kleber Hans, if you sprechen Sie Deutsch. Right? It was a German horse, and he had a trainer who claimed that his horse could do mathematical problems, solving mathematical problems. You have to learn, how to multiply, all that sort of thing. And amazingly, it seemed it could. And here he is, showing it in his setup, and there's a crowd of people, because it's a long time ago, turn of the last century there, Victorian times. Huge crowds came to see the horse. It was a real money spinner. The Kaiser came to see it. Queen Victoria came for it. The London Times had pictures of it. And it was really an amazing thing, because no one could figure out why this horse could do complicated maths that their kids couldn't do, or maybe they couldn't do, the counting horse. So, what was going on here? Well, a clever bunch of people, psychologists, animal trainers and professors, formed a little committee. The Kaiser said, I want you to find out what's going on here. I'm not sure this is good. And they really put this guy through the ringer and the horse for several weeks to see what was going on. And what they found was that what would happen in a typical situation is you see the horse there, it's got blinkers, not blindfolds, so it can concentrate on the board where the guy is pointing, what is 2 times 3. That's what he's doing there. Say versus 5 times 3 Hans, and then Hans, if he knew the answer, which he always did, he would come forward and he would tap with his hoof on that little board that you see there. That's how, and they would go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, 5. He got it. Yeah. There you are. So that's how it was done, and the horse would start solving the problem when the trainer would point to, shall we say, 2 times 3, and he'd point 2 times 3, Hans, and the pointing was a signal for the horse to start. It's now seemed tapping. But how did it stop at 5, or whatever the answer was? And nobody could figure out how it was done, if it was a trick, until they looked very closely. They didn't have video, but they had some quite clever things. And it turns out the guy had very bushy, dark eyebrows. You can probably see there. And he was looking at the horse. And many people believe that he wasn't doing this to trick people. He really did. So when the horse, say the answer was 5, went 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. He was looking at the horse away from the board, but his eyebrows twitched upward about like 1/4 of an inch or something. People couldn't see it until ages of investigation, and that stopped the horse at 5. That's what it was, or any other answer. And they eventually did this and proved this by getting another guy who was a psychology professor to do the same thing. With horse, was this Hans? And he had eyebrows too, and he leaned forward when the horse started, and his eyebrows twitched up. It wasn't, like this. But in crude animal things, it often is. I've seen dogs barking numbers on TV, and I go, what's 5 times 2? And then the horse goes down, and he goes back. Yeah. Very obvious. You see it sometimes, and the dog gets a biscuit too, so it's very good. So there you go. So the horse was actually not brilliant, but it was very, very good. Had very good observation of its trainer, like many animals do. So a horse or a dog, they see a lot. They may not understand a lot, but they can damn well see the eyebrows going up and down, which most people can't. Dogs and cats actually aren't brilliant at this kind of thing, at solving other problems, not counting problems. This is a problem, ignore the cat on the right, that's too complicated. The dog there, that's not a real experiment, it's an impression of what the experiment is. And the experiment is, you put food for a hungry dog the wrong side of a barrier, all right? And the dog looks at it, but it can't get at it. That's much bigger than that thing. It might be a huge fence, it might have a... and what does the dog do? Well, what the dog does normally is stare at the food, salivate, sometimes paw at the food, sometimes try to jump and crash through. What it doesn't do is to solve the problem is you go around, right, away from the food. Oh no, away from the food and come back and get it like that. Now you put a chimp in that kind of situation, again with a huge sort of barrier, and the chimp will sit looking at what you do and sit looking and so on, and kind of maybe touch the thing, but within seconds has looked around and shot round and grabbed the food. You may not believe this, dog lovers, but there we are. So chimps are very smart. Much smarter usually than dogs. And this is a thing called the chimpanzee box test, which is a very famous experiment, often done in the old days at London Zoo, when you were allowed to do this for children, but now with animal welfare, special license, don't do. So that's why it's in black and white. It's an old experiment. Now, what you do here is give the chimp a problem to solve. But first of all, you've got to train it with the tools to do the problem that it will have in its memory, and then it's got to link them all up to solve the problem, right? And what you do with a chimp is you put it in a bleak sort of cage, about as big as this sort of stage that we have here, hungry chimp, right? And you give it a couple of boxes. And this is going to take a long time, even for a chimp, right? Eventually the chimp will, because he's got nothing else to do, probably put one box on the other, throw them around the cage, but eventually, as soon as it does that, it gets a banana. And very quickly, the dog, you do it again, and the chimp, like a shot, goes, stacks the boxes, get the banana, and maybe stack more boxes, and so on and so forth, and so on. Now, what you do then is you walk away from the experimental situation, maybe for weeks, okay, and let's say a month later, you come in the same cage, 3 boxes around, right? But this time, the banana is stuck up there somewhere. You can see it just out of reach where those lights are. And the chimp sees the banana. It's hungry. And would you believe, quite quickly, in many cases, after fooling around and banging the boxes and running around the cage and giving the trainer bad looks, will stack the boxes and grab the banana. Because it remembered, you stack boxes, I can get up high. You need imagination to do that. And here's a chimp at the bottom, which has also been taught to joint a couple of sticks together like a fishing rod, to make it larger to get a banana. You can do a really complicated experiment after, if you've got the patience for doing this after weeks, is to get the chimp in a cage, right, with boxes and sticks, and it's got to stack the boxes and joint the rod and climb up to get the banana, and it will. So it's using previously learned experience to figure out and solve a new situation. And there it is, busily doing that. And using a tool, actually, is in itself often regarded as a sign of advanced mental ability in evolution, and particularly in human evolution, right? You go back to the Wood Age, the Stone Age, the Iron Age. What do people go on? It's the age where they were fashioning tools to modify and use and exploit the environment. It was a big breakthrough every time it happened in those various ages, and we look back to and using that sort of a tool to do things you can't do with your bare hands, fashion things, and eventually build a city, is really quite something. And so eventually it leads to modern technology in an evolutionary sense, right? So we're going through that. So it's regarded as very important. And yet animals develop it in the wild. Yeah, it's not just us that do this. Chimps, again, are very good. They do a number of things that they develop without anyone telling them on their own and learn to do. And picking fresh leaves to wipe wounds and things has been noticed. And it's been claimed, but I'm not sure about this. The leaves they often use for this have antibiotic properties. And you probably know in the rainforest there's lots of things that have this. It's been claimed, but I'm not sure. But anyway, they do this. More importantly, a common thing they do is if you have a termite mound, right? The one thing you can't do, because the termites have built it for this purpose, is get in there and eat them, right? No, and they've survived for millions of years by building their own nests, which are impenetrable to most animals that want to eat them. But if you poke a little twig through the holes, all right, and you hold it and wave it about a bit, the soldier termites inside get quite annoyed and grab it, as they would to defend. And if you pull them out very slowly, you get a twig full of termites and you eat them. You may have seen this on video. It's very common. Chimps do this very often. So they have to fashion a little stick which is long enough and also the right diameter to get in those holes, and they have to learn how to do that. And what's more, they save the tool. If it's very successful, they stash it away behind the mound and don't let others have it. It's mine, and stuff like that. They even have clubs and spears they grab from the forest, because chimps often have little tribal warfares which aren't very, very pleasant. And they use weapons against each other. So they've developed feeding tools, and they've developed early weapons, just as Stone Age man had his clubs and things and spears. Chimps are on the way to doing that. Now, here's one I really like, stone tools. Sort of Stone Age thing. Capuchin monkeys from South America, you may have seen perhaps, I don't know, in the zoo. Very common, clever little monkey walking around there. And they live in Brazil, in South America, and there's an awful lot of coffee in Brazil and an awful lot of Brazil nuts. Now, Brazil nut has got a fierce defense against being eaten, right? Ever tried to crack one in the old days before they came? Right. The nutcrackers you need, or the hammer, right? But if they could get into this food source, it's a huge thing in the rainforest for them. It's very rich and very good. A handful of those things will keep you going for the day. Very rich, particularly in carbohydrates. So what will he do? Well, what they've learned to do is find a rock, which is not always easy in this kind of rainforest, because there's a lot of mud, you probably know. Find a rock, and a rock that's got some little holes in the top of it that they're going to use as an anvil. And they're looking for one where they can put a Brazil nut in, so when they whack it, it won't shoot out. And that's what this one is doing here. He's got his anvil, and now he's got his hammer. He's got a rock he's found. And there he is, going to get the rock on the left, because that's his rock. He keeps it and stores it and defends it against others. And when he's harvested some nuts, he goes around this business and cracks the nut like that. That's an amazing little cultural development, the things you see in primates, monkeys and chimps, quite a lot. So he can do that. Now just look at the bottom slide there. There he is doing it. And there's his baby son or daughter watching, learning by imitation. You don't have to invent the wheel in technology again every time. Someone invented it and others copy it by imitation. So he knows where the nuts are coming from. After a few months of this, he'll get his own rock, pinch a nut, try it himself. There you go. Very interesting indeed. Birds are very good at doing this sometimes, more than we thought, actually. The famous one is one of Darwin's finches called the woodpecker finch on the Galapagos Islands, where there are no woodpeckers and there aren't many birds for all kinds of reasons you know about evolution. Just a few birds there, and they can exploit everything if they've got the equipment. But they haven't evolved to be a sort of woodpecker that could get bugs and things out of tree trunks like this. They haven't got the equipment. But they found a piece of equipment which is actually a cactus spine. They get a cactus spine and they poke the bugs out of the holes that they can find. And there's one at the bottom eating the sort of bug that thought it was safe nesting away in there. And again, if it's got a very good spine, it will store it and keep it and use it. And its babies will watch it. Crows, it's been found, are really clever in the bird figure. Possibly we're getting up to sort of chimp level here. There's a sort of friendly row in zoological circles about whether monkeys and apes and birds are the smartest. But things like crows, all members of the crow family, you may know, those of you who are naturalists, are very smart. They watch things, they can find everything, they steal things. They're very, very clever. And it's been found that many of these crows in the wild not only have sort of spines, but they bend them to form a hook to get particularly difficult things out, like that. And they've been taken into the lab at Oxford University in England in particular, but other places too, and studied by people who can't believe the things they can do. And here's one that shows you how smart they are. This is the bottom thing here. So here's a crow in a huge cage, you can see, and there's some glass tubes there. In the glass tube, it's filled about half with water, and floating on top of the water is a lovely, delicious food treat that floats on water, and they know it and they can see it. They've eaten it before. But how can they get it? Yeah, and what they have to do And what they can do in this situation is look around and find, would you believe, because they've been put there in this experiment, stones all over the place. They get a bunch of stones, bring them there, and they then, like this one, pop a stone in, and up a level it goes. And they get another stone, and up a level, until they can get it with their beak. Right? Isn't that brilliant? There's a huge amount of this research going on here. Herons in the wild do a similar kind of thing to this, actually. When I say similar, it's not really tool use. It's being a fisherman. And you know how fishermen go out with bits of bread and all kinds of, and throw it out so fish will come in and they bait as it's called, and it works quite well. And this heron here has found a piece of bread, and it does. I've seen this. It's actually quite common. I've seen this myself. He's now walking to his little fishing spot where he knows the fish are, and then on the right, he's not dropped it. He's cast out the bread, a foot or two out, and he hunches back in his sort of hunting position, and he waits. And the little fish come nibble, 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 and all of a sudden, with his long neck, he'll strike and he'll get them. He's been fishing, and he's got them. Brilliant. Right. A crunch point about this animal intelligence business is, can animals learn a language? Do they have a language? Well, not really, actually, but there's been claims by psychologists in particular, people like this who brought up baby chimps as a child, didn't have children, brought up a chimp and a child, it's got diapers and everything, and it feeds and hangs around, watches the TV, and goes through the teenage years and all that sort of stuff. And what these Americans have done is they've taught chimps ASL, American Sign Language, which I can't do. You've seen it on TV, of course, all the time. And they can teach the letters and the words to chimps. And this one claimed 350 words, so it could talk, rather like a person using ASL. There have been severe criticisms of this business, and people think it's a bit like the clever hands thing. There may be indiscreet signalling and stuff going on, but anyway, there we are. It's in the literature. But the point is, if you do have a chimp like this, what's the point of it really, actually? There isn't much point, because they don't develop a language with the structure that you need to call it a language. They can learn a word like hay or whatever, or food or banana or whatever. But they don't have grammar, they don't have verbs, syntax, grammar, word order, all the things that make a language a language. And even when they learn ASL, it takes years to do this, and they never pass it on. They never sort of pass it on to their friends or their offspring. It's just sort of dead end. A bit of a disappointing result after 20 years of work. In any case, people who study chimps in the wild will tell you they have their own system of vocal signals. I'll be telling you about this if you come back for the next lecture. A vocal system of simple calls. You all hear these grunts and screams chimps make. They all mean something. They don't need a language. They have a communication system of calls that serves them quite well. Yeah. It's communication, as I'll be telling you. It's not actually language, technically speaking. But towards the end, here's something for you to think whether that's true, what I've said, or not. Parrots. Everybody knows you can teach parrots words, right? Rude swear words and all kinds of things have been taught to parrots. And they have the vocal apparatus to be able to produce a word by kind of quirk, really. It's the same apparatus that birds use to call or sing, and parrots have got it a bit more complicated, so they can say hello or whatever. It's a good imitation. And the point is, they can do this, and they get fed, encouraged to do it, so you can teach them a whole bunch of words. But do they understand it? Is it language? Are they just doing it to get the next piece of seed or bird food? Well, here's one to make you think at the end of the lecture. There was a famous talking parrot called Alex. And Alex was brought up for 20-odd years by this lady here, American psychologist who worked in a number of universities, including Harvard, Irene Pepperberg, who was a very famous lady because she raised an African grey parrot for about 20 years or more and taught it all kinds of elaborate things. Now look, she taught it 150 words, not just sort of names. It would name, if she pointed to them, 50 objects. It would say key, if she showed them a key, like here. 5 colours, it would say green key, if she showed it, or which one is the green, all this kind of stuff. It could count to about 6. It knew concepts like bigger and smaller, same and different. So it had the rudiment, all the rudiments, we would say, of a kind of language. It's absolutely extraordinary story. And it's caused a lot of fuss. The funniest thing is when you see Irene, as I do, on the international sort of conference circuit, where weird professors go to find about this stuff. She shows wonderful videos of herself working with Alex, as she does on a daily basis, like having a child. So she brings Alex out, he perches on his perch, and she interacts. She teaches him, she talks to him. And these videos are absolutely extraordinary. The one I liked best was she came to London, and I was proud to introduce her, and she showed this thing, and she was a rather, dare I say, a fierce American New York lady. She wasn't a soft school mom, she was pretty tough, and she snapped at Alex, Alex. And she brought him out on this video, and she said, Alex, and they would, what colour are the cubes, or whatever it was, and she did this a few times, and Alex was sort of obviously not quite on form, and he looked at Irene and he said, I am bored, and walked off. He has language, don't you think? Anyhow, he was very, very fussy and very interesting. He lived to an age of 30, which is a good age. Parents are long lived. He died in 2007. And when he died, he was on TV, sort of a bit on the news. This is an American coast-to-coast show. I think it was called the Today program. Some of you may know. A very important thing, and there's an important lady presenter, and there she is telling them about the death of Alex. Very famous, more famous than some politicians and sportsmen, it seems. So it's a wonderful story, and it will make you think about what I've said about animals and whether they can learn things or not. And because people always ask me, I don't have the videos or the CDs or the books, but they abound. If you want to look up, if you type in Irene or Alex the parrot or something into Google, you'll find a load of stuff. And they're worth reading, and particularly her book, Alex and Me. And if you read the book, you'll find out the words that Alex said to Irene the night before he died. And with that thought, I'll leave you and rush up and have my lobster sandwich and hope to see you for one more lecture in a few days' time. Thank you very much for coming.